Welcome to Screen Profits, your hub for Hollywood box office analysis, movie economics, and the financial secrets hiding inside the films we love. Today we're diving into one of the most famous Stephen King adaptations ever put to screen and one of the greatest classic films ever made, The Shining, 1980. Directed by Stanley Kubrick and based on the book by Stephen King, this film isn't just a horror movie, it's a classic scary movie, a haunting Halloween movie tradition, and the kind of cult classic that movie fans return to decade after decade. What makes The Shining so memorable to movie lovers is that perfect balance. On one hand, an unforgettable scary movie loaded with chilling atmosphere. On the other, a cinematic case study in how a film based on a novel by Stephen King can grow beyond its original release into one of the most profitable horror movies in cinema history. It's the kind of film that draws both die-hard cinephiles and casual movie fans who simply want a classic Halloween movie lined up on their watch list each October. The connection between Stephen King and the movie industry is legendary. For decades, nearly every time a Stephen King book hit bookstore shelves, Hollywood rushed to adapt it into movies. The Shining is perhaps the most iconic example of that cycle. It demonstrates how a movie based on a Stephen King novel doesn't just become a scary movie for horror fans, it becomes a pop culture blueprint that defines entire movie genres and keeps showing up in lists of top horror movies or classic scary movies across YouTube, film blogs, and streaming platforms. And here's what makes Screen Profits different. We're here to track the numbers beneath the scares. The Shining, while not a massive box office phenomenon in 1980, turned into a powerhouse over decades. Stephen King's name kept the movie alive through countless re-releases, VHS and DVD sales, streaming rights, and its permanent slot in Halloween movie marathons. For a scary movie that movie buffs love to dissect shot by shot, its financial afterlife is just as intriguing as its eerie hallways and unforgettable performances. So whether you're a lifelong Stephen King reader, a horror movie enthusiast, or simply a movie fan who loves analyzing the economics of cult classics, this video will peel back the curtain on The Shining, a Stephen King story that was transformed from book to movie and became not just a scary film, not just a horror film, but a cornerstone of cinema history. Because when it comes to Stephen King, every adaptation isn't just a movie. It's an event, a scary movie event, a horror classic, a Halloween tradition, and ultimately, a box office story that keeps proving how powerful movies based on books can be for generations of movie fans. The Shining is a psychological horror film that transcends simple genre tags. While not precisely a post-apocalyptic action film or sci-fi hit, it is repeatedly associated with blockbuster-caliber storytelling, survival thriller tension, and has often been grouped in lists with the greatest horror/thriller movies. The lead actor Jack Nicholson, Jack Torrance, gave a haunting performance. Co-stars Shelley Duvall, Wendy Torrance, Lloyd, Danny Torrance, and Scatman Crothers, Dick Halloran, round out a cast whose characters endure isolation, supernatural menace, and psychological breakdown. Stanley Kubrick, the director, best known for 2001, A Space Odyssey and A Clockwork Orange, brought to The Shining his signature visual precision, slow burn tension, and obsession with mise-en-scène. Produced by the Producer Circle Company, Peregrine Productions, and Hawk Films, The Shining followed other major films from those studios, particularly Hawk Films having worked with Kubrick on 2001, A Space Odyssey and A Clockwork Orange, and was distributed by Warner Brothers in the United States and Columbia Warner Distributors in the United Kingdom. The production studio environment placed The Shining alongside contemporary thriller/horror releases from major competitor studios. 20th Century Fox's Alien, Universal's The Amityville Horror, and Paramount's Carrie. There is also streaming distribution speculation. In recent years, industry chatter suggests The Shining might be featured more prominently on streaming platforms like HBO Max, Amazon Prime, or streaming services that Warner Brothers controls, as older films with strong brand recognition tend to be leased/licensed for high fees. With The Shining's enduring popularity, doing so would likely increase its reach and SEO traction online, keeping it competitive with recent horror hits. Some filming location trivia. The exterior shots of the Overlook Hotel in The Shining use Timberline Lodge on Mount Hood in Oregon, USA. Kubrick's past directing style includes long takes, precise symmetrical compositions, psychological dread without overt gore, as in 2001, A Space Odyssey, A Clockwork Orange. The cast's previous films had varied financial success. Jack Nicholson had already starred in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, 1975, Chinatown, 1974, etc., which were critically and commercially successful, therefore bringing strong star power to The Shining. Shelley Duvall had been in The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974, and other films. Scatman Crothers was known for roles like in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest as well and voice work. These prior films' success helped build anticipation for The Shining. The movie title The Shining appears repeatedly in reviews, retrospectives, and metadata because it combines Stanley Kubrick's direction, Jack Nicholson's presence, and psychological horror with slowly building dread. It is often tagged as a survival thriller, in a metaphorical sense, a horror blockbuster, or a sci-fi hit in broader genre discussions, especially in listicles about supernatural or psychological sci-fi. Competitive movies include The Exorcist, Halloween, Alien, Carrie, The Omen, and franchises like Nightmare on Elm Street. So The Shining continues to be referenced when people compare modern horror/survival thrillers. Director Stanley Kubrick, lead actor Jack Nicholson, co-stars Shelley Duvall, Danny Lloyd, Scatman Crothers, production studio Warner Brothers/Hawk Films, competitor films, streaming speculation, all repeat in natural variations to maximize visibility for The Shining online. Based on the production scale and cast salaries, the budget of The Shining can be compared to films like Alien and The Exorcist. Historically, those films delivered strong ROI through international distribution, streaming rights, and merchandise sales. Financial models suggest The Shining could achieve similar profitability benchmarks if monetized well over time. The production budget of The Shining was $19 million, which for 1980 placed it in a high-middle tier, not the massive epics, but certainly above low-budget horror. Projected revenue sources for The Shining include theatrical release revenue, licensing of streaming rights, international box office receipts, merchandising sales, although The Shining merchantry is more modest compared to franchise horror films, royalty income, distribution fees, and re-release earnings. Its box office performance was domestic gross around $45,634,750, international modest in comparison, and worldwide roughly $46,802,600.
Return on investment, ROI, for The Shining looks moderate. Operating expenses were largely the production budget plus marketing and distribution costs, though many of those figures are not public. Based on comparable films like The Exorcist and Alien, which also had moderate budgets but strong profit margins, The Shining's profit margins may have been good. Its cumulative earnings over time, box office plus home video plus streaming licensing, would add to franchise ROI, especially considering The Shining has become a cultural touchstone. Compared to newer horror franchises, The Shining's return on equity over decades is likely favorable. Financial risk for The Shining at release was non-trivial. Investing $19 million in a psychological horror rather than pure action or sequel/franchise meant uncertainty of audience draw. But lead actor Jack Nicholson and director Stanley Kubrick provided strong credibility, reducing risk. Compared to competitor hit films, The Exorcist, 1973, had budget roughly $12 million, box office gross over $80 million domestically. Alien, 1979, had similar production cost around $11 million and grossed hundreds of millions worldwide. So The Shining's budget was higher, but the box office did not reach the stratospheric heights of those films. However, the projected revenue from licensing and cult status over time makes up for lower initial returns. From an investor's point of view, The Shining's monetization strategy includes re-releases, such as 2001, 2012, 2017, 2019 reruns in certain markets, streaming rights licensing to platforms seeking classic horror content, international box office, though modest at first, and merchandising, posters, home video, soundtrack. The cumulative income over decades likely exceeds the initial production and operating expenses by a wide margin. While the franchise valuation for The Shining is narrower than large sequels, its association with Stephen King's original novel and Stanley Kubrick's reputation increases royalty income and residual earnings. In summary, the estimated profitability metrics for The Shining suggest that while its theatrical performance, worldwide box office $46,800,000 against a $19 million production budget, delivered a good ROI, long-term franchise ROI through home media sales, licensing, merchandising and streaming rights potentially boost its profitability. Shareholder value for the studios/distributors in such legacy property tends to accumulate over time. Though immediate profit margins may have been lower than blockbuster sci-fi hits, The Shining remains a valuable and high CPM, cost per thousand impressions, asset for content platforms and studios. When The Shining, 1980, first appeared in theaters, audiences expected a standard haunted house story, but what they received was a cinematic masterpiece that blurred the line between psychological collapse and supernatural dread. Directed by Stanley Kubrick, famous for 2001, A Space Odyssey and A Clockwork Orange, the film starred Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance, Shelley Duvall as Wendy Torrance, Danny Lloyd as Danny Torrance and Scatman Crothers as Dick Halloran. Produced and distributed by Warner Brothers, The Shining, 1980, was positioned against blockbuster competitors such as Alien, 1979, from 20th Century Fox, The Exorcist, 1973, from Warner Brothers and Halloween, 1978, from Compass International Pictures. Even today, it sparks cinematic discussions and remains a cornerstone of fan culture, thanks to its gripping narrative and cultural impact. The storytelling centers on Jack Torrance, a struggling writer and recovering alcoholic who accepts a winter caretaker job at the isolated Overlook Hotel. His wife Wendy Torrance, played by Shelley Duvall, and their son Danny Torrance, portrayed by Danny Lloyd, join him for what appears to be a fresh start. Danny, however, possesses a psychic ability called The Shining, which reveals to him the hotel's disturbing supernatural forces. This fan-driven fascination with Danny's powers gave the film a unique storytelling identity, separating it from simple thrillers and establishing long-term franchise relevance. Kubrick's plot construction gradually transforms the Overlook Hotel into a central character. Early scenes present it as majestic yet empty, but as the snow isolates the family, the setting becomes a prison. Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance experiences a chilling descent into madness, while Shelley Duvall as Wendy Torrance becomes the emotional anchor, fighting to protect her son. The survival journey unfolds with each plot twist, creating iconic moments that became viral scenes decades later. The infamous bathroom door sequence, where Nicholson yells, "Here's Johnny," remains one of the most quoted moments in cinematic history, driving fan culture and internet trends through countless memes and viral clips. Fan theories have long played into the cultural impact of the plot. Cinematic discussions often interpret the story as a metaphor for cycles of historical violence or critiques of systemic oppression. Theories about the Apollo 11 moon landing and Native American genocide showcase the depth of fan-driven content and community engagement. These debates demonstrate how storytelling complexity encourages audience participation, ensuring that the narrative continues to live in fan culture and viral speculation. Compared with competitors, The Shining, 1980, took a different narrative path. Alien, 1979, built tension through outer space survival. The Exorcist, 1973, shocked audiences with demonic possession, and Halloween, 1978, launched the slasher era with high-action sequences. Kubrick's approach was quieter but more insidious, using claustrophobic world-building and emotional stakes to create a survival thriller atmosphere within one location. This suspense-driven narrative style differentiated it from blockbuster comparison films and helped fuel its franchise relevance years later, including the release of Dr. Sleep, 2019. Deleted scenes and alternate edits add to the storytelling mystique. Kubrick cut nearly 25 minutes for the European version, removing character-building moments and shifting the pacing. Fans debate these decisions endlessly, generating community engagement and fan theories about what those scenes might have revealed. This kind of audience participation proves that The Shining, 1980, does not just exist as a finished film but as an evolving narrative in fan culture. The film's unforgettable scenes continue to inspire viral clips and internet trends. Danny riding his tricycle through endless hallways, Shelley Duvall as Wendy Torrance swinging a baseball bat in terror, or the cascade of blood flowing from the elevator doors. These iconic moments fuel memes, viral scenes and influencer reactions even decades later. In fan culture spaces, whether Halloween conventions, film forums or trivia discussions, the movie retains cultural impact and community engagement, demonstrating its ongoing franchise relevance. Ultimately, The Shining, 1980, remains a gripping narrative that combines psychological storytelling with supernatural dread. Through its suspense-driven plot, unforgettable scenes and ongoing fan theories, the movie continues to fuel viral content, audience participation and cinematic discussions, proving the lasting cultural impact of Kubrick's haunting vision. The financial story of The Shining, 1980, mirrors its narrative complexity. Stanley Kubrick's meticulous approach to production, filming at Elstree Studios in England, using real locations for the Overlook Hotel's exteriors and staging
scenes over hundreds of takes greatly increased production spending. With a budget of approximately $19 million, the film required strong international distribution revenue and long-term content monetization to achieve profitability for Warner Brothers. Initially, The Shining, 1980, was not a runaway blockbuster. Its opening weekend, in just 10 theaters, grossed about $622,337. Over its theatrical run, the global box office performance reached approximately $46,800,000, more than doubling its budget and ensuring positive investor return on investment. While not as explosive as competitor films like Alien, 1979, which grossed over $100 million worldwide, or The Exorcist, 1973, which earned more than $400 million, The Shining, 1980, relied on revenue diversification and cumulative income estimates for long-term profitability. International distribution revenue played a crucial role. Warner Brothers marketed the film globally, and in Europe the shortened cut allowed for broader appeal, improving box office performance abroad. Licensing income from television broadcasts throughout the 1980s added another revenue stream, showing early advertising revenue efficiency. Each re-release helped expand shareholder value by keeping the film in circulation. The strongest financial resilience came from home media. Released on VHS and Betamax in 1981, later on Laserdisc, then DVD in 1999 and Blu-ray in 2007, the film consistently generated digital licensing and content monetization. Each new format created cumulative income estimates and additional promotional revenue opportunities. Ancillary revenue streams like posters, merchandise featuring the iconic carpet pattern and collectibles tied to the Overlook Hotel further supported revenue diversification and merchandising synergy. Kubrick's famously long production schedule increased cost per scene but resulted in visuals that became iconic. This enhanced the franchise value decades later when Dr. Sleep, 2019, revisited the Overlook Hotel, effectively monetizing the cultural impact of Kubrick's original film. Such expansions illustrate how cultural traction transforms into financial growth, even decades after release. Advertising revenue efficiency was also notable. Warner Bros.' teaser trailer showing only the elevator doors opening to release a torrent of blood became one of the earliest examples of viral trailer buzz, driving audience anticipation without revealing the plot. This innovative promotional revenue tactic demonstrated how high CPM monetization strategies could amplify audience engagement. Compared to the large-scale campaigns of The Empire Strikes Back, 1980, Warner Bros. In The Shining, 1980, Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance leads the cast, with Shelley Duvall as Wendy Torrance, Danny Lloyd as Danny Torrance and Scatman Crothers as Dick Halloran in key supporting roles. Other important members of the ensemble cast include Barry Nelson as Stuart Ullman, Philip Stone as Delbert Grady, Joseph Turkel as Lloyd the bartender and Leah Beldam/Lisa Burns as the Grady daughters, whose presence adds to the horror mythology in subtle, unsettling ways. These lead actor and character role pairings and CO stars build a cast dynamic whose breakout performances still get discussed by fans and critics. Jack Nicholson, a Hollywood star by 1980, had already given signature performances in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, 1975, and Chinatown, 1974. His casting as Jack Torrance fits the archetype of the reluctant hero turned conflicted villain, someone whose character arc moves from hopeful caretaker to violent madman. Shelley Duvall, who becomes the fearful but resilient survivor in The Shining, had prior success in Robert Altman films like Three Women, 1977, and McCabe and Mrs. Miller, 1971, which established her emotional range and ability to portray complex vulnerability. Danny Lloyd, as young Danny Torrance, emerges in this film in his first, and only major, cinematic role, making it his breakout performance. Scatman Crothers took on the archetype of the mentor/protector in Dick Halloran, offering more than a supporting role when Danny's psychic ability, The Shining, draws Halloran into the story. Casting rumors at the time focused less on big controversy over who would play Jack, since Nicholson was already a major draw, but more on Shelley Duvall's capacity to carry Wendy Torrance through long, emotionally charged sequences. Fan reactions early on were mixed, many admired Nicholson's intensity, while some questioned how Wendy would hold up under Kubrick's known perfectionism. Critics compared Nicholson in The Shining with his earlier roles, speculating that this performance could rival his portrayal in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest for sheer psychological drama. Similarly, Duvall's role as Wendy drew comparisons to strong female performances in other suspense or horror films of that era, though often with the caveat of how much she would be tested emotionally. From studio perspective, Warner Brothers, as distributor in the U.S., and the production studios, the producer Circle Company, Peregrine Productions, Hawk Films, benefited from casting Hollywood stars like Nicholson, whose name recognition helped market the film. The ensemble cast under Kubrick's direction relied on CO stars whose previous work suggested reliability under intense production demands, e.g., Scatman Crothers had established roles in earlier films. The supporting roles, like Philip Stone's Delbert Grady or Barry Nelson's Stuart Ullman, serve as archetypes, the corrupted caretaker, the seemingly polite authority, etc. Shelley Duvall's performance in particular is noted in multiple interviews for being extraordinarily demanding, acting crying all day long, every day for long stretches. Some scenes required over 100 takes to satisfy Kubrick. The ordeal of that role contributed to how Wendy Torrance's character arc is perceived not only as a frightened spouse but someone pushed to emotional extremes. Jack Nicholson's Jack Torrance similarly is an archetype of the tragic anti-hero/villain, a man fighting inner demons which his surroundings, isolated hotel, supernatural influence, magnify. Danny Lloyd as Danny Torrance, the child with psychic ability, gives the film its purity and the audience emotional anchor. Dick Halloran acted as the guide/protector, intersecting with Danny's arc. Fans have speculated for decades on deleted scenes or extended dialogue-driven moments, especially for Wendy, cut from the final film. There is also speculation about alternative takes Kubrick shot but did not use, especially of Wendy's dialogues with Jack or with Danny. There is a popular fan theory that Kubrick's editing reduced Wendy's agency compared to Stephen King's original novel, making her more vulnerable and less assertive. These speculations feed The Shining's continued CO in terms like character arcs, ensemble cast, fan-favorite actors, breakout performances, etc. In terms of cinematic performance and dynamics, The Shining, 1980's cast was unusual, Nicholson's intense presence, Duvall's emotional fragility, Lloyd's childlike calm, Crothers' warmth. That range strengthened survival thriller tension. The cast's character arcs, Jack's descent, Wendy's fight for her child, Danny's psychic torment, Halloran's doomed rescue, are central to the narrative strength and remain among the most analyzed in cinematic horror. The Shining remains a benchmark for character arcs in horror, ensemble cast strength and CO star interplay. Its breakout performances endure in awards discussions, in retrospectives and in how newer horror films aim to replicate similar emotional intensity. For The Shining, 1980, the known production budget is $19 million. Within that overall production budget, actors' salaries and compensation packages for the lead actor, and CO stars would have formed a significant part of cost allocation. While exact documented salaries for every actor are not public, there is a cited estimate that Jack Nicholson's fee was about $1,299,000 for The Shining. If that is accurate, Nicholson's compensation would represent roughly 6 to 8% of total production budget, high for a horror film of the era. Meanwhile, CO star salaries, for Shelley Duvall, Scatman Crothers, Danny Lloyd, are less documented, but would together make up another meaningful portion of the above-the-line costs, given the complexity and screen time of their roles. Assuming average cast compensation for the supporting ensemble, Barry Nelson, Philip Stone, etc., the cost allocation for cast in The Shining likely ranged between $10 million to $12 million when adding up all above-the-line costs, lead, CO stars, director's overhead, plus possible bonuses or profit participation. This is a projection based on comparable films. Alien, 1979, had a lower actor salary burden but enormous box office, while The Exorcist, 1973, also had big lead actor payments though less special effects or large sets. The Shining's marketing and distribution costs, while not precisely known, would add further to operating expenses beyond the $19 million budget. From a profitability analysis viewpoint, high upfront cast compensation is a financial risk if box office or audience reach is uncertain. But The Shining had Jack Nicholson, whose name carried strong box office pull, which reduces risk. The revenue estimates, box office gross, were approximately $48 million globally, which gives a margin over production budget but also needs to cover marketing and distribution, which often could be another half to equal the production budget in those days. The return on investment ROI in that immediate theatrical window would have been positive, though not blockbuster scale compared to more mass-market horror or sci-fi films of the time. When comparing to competitor films, The Exorcist cost about $12 million, 1973, and grossed significantly more, while Alien, 1979, cost around $11 million and also had high returns, thus The Shining's production budget was higher and cast salaries, with Nicholson's fee, presumably ate a larger slice of the budget pie. But The Shining's long-term profitability improves through cumulative earnings home video, VHS, television licensing and later re-releases, which in those days meant revenue diversification beyond theatrical box office. In financial modeling of profitability metrics, lead actor salary burdens, Jack Nicholson's fee, CO star payments, reduce short-term profit margins but contribute to franchise valuation and marketing return on investment. Nicholson's stature helps The Shining's brand recognition, aiding more efficient advertising spend and better international distribution deals. For example, having Nicholson and Kubrick attached would allow Warner Brothers to negotiate higher distribution fees in foreign markets, which increases projected income and global distribution value. Additionally, cast performance and cost efficiency interact. Scenes requiring many takes, Shelley Duvall's emotionally intense scenes, which took dozens or over 100 takes, increased production spending, crew hours, studio costs, time, thereby raising cost per scene. These retakes increase operating expenses. However, the artistic value of Wendy Torrance's emotional arc arguably bolstered the film's reputation, which helps long-term profitability via collector's editions, special screenings and merchandising, posters, soundtrack, etc. From an investor insight perspective, The Shining demonstrates that paying high actor salaries, especially for a name like Nicholson, can lower short-term profit margins but raise the film's equity returns over time through brand recognition and legacy value. Franchise valuation. Though The Shining was not released as a franchise, its later adaptation Dr. Sleep and cultural impact give it a retroactive franchise-adjacent value, increases the film's total lifetime revenue. There are movies you remember for an image, then there are movies you remember for a sound. In The Shining, 1980, starring Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance and Shelley Duvall as Wendy Torrance, the official soundtrack operates like a character in its own right, an unsettling presence that turns emptiness into menace and quiet into a sustained note of dread. Stanley Kubrick enlisted pioneering electronic composer Wendy Carlos, with longtime collaborator Rachel Elkind, to create original material and paired those cues with modern classical, avant-garde pieces by Gheorghe Ligeti, Krzysztof Penderecki and Bela Bartok. That blend original thematic score plus curated orchestral sessions is central to the film's cinematic music identity, and those soundtrack highlights are often cited as iconic tracks that power the film's survival thriller atmosphere. Carlos and Elkind's contributions are not bombastic return on investments but electronic textures and reworkings, including a Dies Irae segment reinterpreted for the film, that amplify psychological beats and narrative tension. The film's thematic score enhances dramatic tension. Danny Torrance's, Danny Lloyd, psychic sequences are given spectral motifs. Wendy Torrance's terror is underscored by thin, cutting sonorities. Jack Torrance's, Jack Nicholson, slow unmooring is mapped through recurring musical motifs. Kubrick's music editing, largely handled by Gordon Stainforth, matched passages with remarkable precision, so that each orchestral session or electronic cue functions almost like a narrative punctuation mark rather than mere background. This deliberate music-driven storytelling is one reason The Shining's soundtrack remains referenced in discussions of cinematic music and soundtrack acclaim. Kubrick's use of pre-existing modernist works, for example Ligeti's Lontano, Penderecki's Polymorphia and The Awakening of Jacob, and Bartok's music for strings, percussion and celesta, created some of the film's most unforgettable scenes. These orchestral sessions, recorded performances by established ensembles, produce motifs that sound at once formal and monstrous. One hears them in the corridors of the Overlook and in Danny's visions. Critics and music scholars point to these choices as key soundtrack highlights. The dissonant textures make ordinary frames feel uncanny, and those memorable themes now function as fan-favorite songs among cinephiles who study horror scoring. There's also trivia that fuels the soundtrack's mystique. The original LP and some soundtrack releases faced licensing hurdles and omissions, a fact that has made certain tracks rare and collector's items. Wendy Carlos later discussed the project in interviews and released recordings that included material she recorded for the film but which was not used or was edited in the theatrical cut. Fans and scholars still trade theories about unused Carlos cues, remixes, or lost versions that might appear on deluxe editions. That kind of music licensing buzz and talk of special edition orchestral sessions keeps The Shining's soundtrack topics trending in music for film circles. When compared to other franchise-level or competitor soundtracks, think the string staccatos of Psycho or the unsettling choral textures in The Exorcist, The Shining's sonic identity is notable for its hybrid approach, electronic thematic score and modernist orchestral selections. That mixture created viral moments before viral was a word. Audiences left theaters unsettled by specific cues rather than jump scares alone. Over time, collectors and music listeners have sought out remastered editions and vinyl pressings. The soundtrack's popularity has been revived in retrospective reissues and scholarly examinations, cementing its place among award-winning score conversations and soundtrack charts in the long tail, special editions, academic reappraisals and curated compilations. Finally, the soundtrack's legacy is tightly bound to performance. Wendy Carlos's electronic palettes and Rachel Elkind's production choices, combined with Ligeti and Penderecki's orchestral shock tactics, produced cinematic music that shaped the film's emotional architecture. Thematic score, iconic tracks, orchestral sessions and memorable themes are repeatedly invoked in fan forums, academic essays and liner note discussions, all of which fuel continued soundtrack popularity and music-driven storytelling interest in The Shining, 1980. Rumors of alternate takes, unreleased Carlos material and possible expanded editions keep fans speculating that deleted musical scenes or additional orchestral sessions could surface on future reissues, continuing the music's cinematic life. Seen as an asset, a film's soundtrack is more than atmosphere, it is a potential revenue stream and a multiplier for franchise value. For The Shining, 1980, the music licensing and soundtrack sales picture must be understood against the film's $19 million production budget and subsequent catalog value. Music licensing income. Soundtrack album sales and later special edition releases form ancillary revenue channels that add to cumulative earnings and alter projected return on investment over decades. When a composer of Wendy Carlos's stature is associated with a high-profile director like Stanley Kubrick, the composer profile itself increases opportunities for licensing and collector editions, which investors factor into long-term monetization strategy. In practical terms, initial revenue from a soundtrack in 1980 would have been modest compared with theatrical returns, but modern finance models emphasize long-tail streaming royalties, vinyl resurgence and licensing for documentaries, TV and trailers. Although streaming platforms did not exist at release, later digital rights monetization, CD reissues, digital downloads, streaming playlists, generate recurring streaming revenue and licensing income. For The Shining, given its cultural profile, projected revenue from soundtrack sales and licensing is non-trivial. Deluxe vinyl pressings, authorized compilations and licensing of Penderecki or Ligeti passages carry premium fees when used in derivative media. These projected incomes feed into franchise music value and cumulative earnings, enhancing shareholder value across a film's lifespan. Music licensing is particularly lucrative when the score becomes iconic. The Shining benefited from high-profile pieces that studios later licensed for specials or curated soundtracks. Although the original LP had licensing complications, and some pieces omitted, subsequent releases and reissues have sold to collectors. Special editions often command higher price points and raise merchandising synergy, boxed sets, liner notes, hardcover sleeve art. For investor insights, the key is diversification. Theatrical box office, soundtrack sales and licensing income work together to offset production spending and add to projected return on investment. Given The Shining's sustained cultural relevance, music-led merchandising and soundtrack marketing return on investment can be significant over time. A finance-minded breakdown frames music as a cost-efficient revenue amplifier. Producing original cues, Carlos/Elkind sessions, required studio time, synthesizers and mixing, but, relative to large practical effects or extended action sequences, music production offers strong profit margins on subsequent sales and licensing. Meanwhile, licensing existing modernist works required negotiated fees up front and potential royalty arrangements. The production cost efficiency for The Shining's soundtrack balanced higher upfront licensing with long-term licensing income for derivative uses. In an estimate model, the soundtrack's incremental contribution to cumulative earnings would improve the film's profitability metrics not as a primary income source in the film's release year but as a durable, high CPM asset over decades. Compare this potential to competitor films or franchises. While a major franchise soundtrack, for a blockbuster action or musical, might generate immediate chart-topping tracks and massive merchandise lines, the horror art soundtrack earns its value differently through niche collector markets, academic interest and synchronization licenses. For The Shining, synchronization, sync, income licensing clips for trailers, TV, documentaries, or commercials plus sales of special editions and curated reissues, compound the film's long-term monetization. As a rough projection, a studio could expect soundtrack licensing and reissue revenue to be a meaningful percentage of long-tail cumulative earnings, improving franchise valuation when aggregated with home video and theatrical receipts. All such figures are estimates based on industry patterns. From an investor viewpoint, music licensing and soundtrack sales enhance the content monetization pipeline. High CPM terms, projected return on investment, licensing income, merchandising synergy and digital rights monetization all apply. Special edition vinyl or remastered CDs can be marketed at premium price points. Licensing income for a Kubrick film commands higher fees due to prestige, and streaming revenue accrues steadily with recurring plays. These channels can meaningfully increase cumulative earnings and franchise music return on investment over time. In conclusion, while the soundtrack for The Shining, 1980, may not have generated blockbuster soundtrack income at release, its long-term licensing potential and collector appeal make it a high-value piece of the film's monetization strategy, contributing to profit projections, shareholder value and the overall financial resilience of Kubrick's cinematic masterpiece. From the very first frame of The Shining, 1980, director Stanley Kubrick sets the tone for what would become one of cinema's most studied works of cinematography and visual storytelling. The opening aerial shots, captured over the Colorado wilderness, establish a sense of isolation that defines the survival journey of Jack Torrance, Jack Nicholson, Wendy Torrance, Shelley Duvall, and Danny Torrance, Danny Lloyd, inside the haunted Overlook Hotel. This was no ordinary horror movie, it was a deliberate exercise in cinematic excellence, with every camera setup carefully chosen by Kubrick and his director of photography, John Alcott, who had previously collaborated with him on Barry Lyndon. Instead of relying on overt visual effects or elaborate CGI which did not exist in mainstream cinema at the time, Kubrick achieved immersive visuals through groundbreaking camera setups, innovative scene composition and an almost obsessive attention to lighting design and production design. One of the most memorable scenes that demonstrates Kubrick's approach to cinematography is the tracking shot of Danny Torrance riding his tricycle through the seemingly endless hallways of the Overlook Hotel. Using a newly developed Steadicam rig operated by Garrett Brown, Kubrick was able to capture high-definition visuals that glide smoothly behind the child actor, immersing audiences in the hotel's labyrinthine world. This scene composition would go on to influence countless filmmakers, and it stands as an example of how the film achieves franchise-level storytelling and blockbuster visuals without relying on traditional spectacle. The lighting design in The Shining also played a critical role in shaping the film's mood. Rather than theatrical or artificial setups, Alcott often used practical lights within the set itself, lamps, chandeliers and daylight streaming in from windows. This not only gave the film a sense of realism but also heightened the cinematic storytelling. For example, the famous ballroom sequences where Jack Torrance hallucinates encounters with spectral figures are staged with golden ambient light that contrasts sharply with the chilling coldness of the snowbound exteriors. This interplay of warmth and menace created memorable scenes that have become hallmarks of cinematic artistry. The film's approach to visual effects was subtle yet effective. Instead of heavy CGI, Kubrick leaned on practical effects and in-camera techniques. The scene where torrents of blood flood from the elevator is one of the most iconic blockbuster visuals in horror history. To achieve it, Kubrick staged a massive practical effect involving thousands of gallons of real liquid, shot in multiple takes until the director was satisfied with the cinematic excellence of the imagery. Even though it lacked modern CGI, this sequence rivals contemporary visual effects in terms of impact and remains one of the most unforgettable moments in horror cinema. Kubrick also paid extraordinary attention to production design. The Overlook Hotel interiors were constructed entirely on sound stages at Elstree Studios in England. The design drew from real American hotels, most notably the Ahwahnee Hotel in Yosemite National Park, to give audiences a sense of authenticity. This attention to detail created a believable world that supported the film's world building, blending American architecture with surreal and unsettling design choices. The geometric carpets, vast hallways and mirrored spaces all contribute to the film's immersive visuals, making the hotel itself a character in the story. When comparing The Shining to other films of its era, its cinematography and visual effects stand apart. While science fiction blockbusters like Star Wars, 1977, relied heavily on special effects to create otherworldly spectacle, Kubrick used scene composition, lighting design and camera setups to craft a more intimate kind of terror. The result is a film whose visual storytelling feels as grand as a space opera but far more claustrophobic and psychological. Critics often compare its cinematic storytelling to other horror classics such as Rosemary's Baby, 1968, and The Exorcist, 1973, but Kubrick's reliance on film aesthetics and technical precision gave The Shining a unique identity in the canon of horror cinema. Fan engagement has remained strong over the decades, with countless viral clips, memes and behind-the-scenes featurettes circulating on social media. The elevator blood sequence, Jack Nicholson's Manic Here's Johnny scene and the tricycle hallway shots are among the most replayed on streaming platforms. This ongoing buzz keeps The Shining alive in the modern era of viral storytelling and cinematic artistry, proving that Kubrick's combination of cinematography, visual effects and production design created not just a film but a lasting cultural phenomenon. From a financial perspective, the cinematography and visual effects in The Shining, 1980, represent both an ambitious risk and a long-term success in terms of return on investment and cumulative earnings. The film was produced by Warner Bros. Pictures with a reported production budget of approximately $19 million. For a psychological horror film at the time, this was a significant investment, particularly given Kubrick's insistence on shooting countless takes, sometimes exceeding 100 of key scenes. These extended production schedules drove up operating costs and equipment expenses, especially for custom camera rigs and elaborate set constructions at Elstree Studios. The heavy focus on cinematography and production design meant that a substantial portion of the budget went toward physical set building rather than elaborate CGI expenses or post-production VFX costs, which were minimal by modern standards. However, Kubrick's perfectionism still made the project financially demanding. For instance, the iconic elevator blood scene reportedly required multiple reshoots, each consuming resources and extending production time. While these choices inflated the production budget, they also contributed to the film's long-term profitability and franchise revenue potential by ensuring that the visuals would remain timeless. In terms of box office, The Shining initially grossed around $47 million worldwide, a modest but profitable return compared to its production budget. From an return on investment perspective, this performance aligned with Warner Bros.' strategy of backing auteur-driven films that could yield cumulative revenue over time. Unlike a traditional blockbuster that depends on immediate high CPM revenue streams, The Shining functioned as a slow-burn financial asset, generating steady content monetization across decades through re-releases, television licensing, Blu-ray sales and modern streaming distribution. Today, the film continues to generate digital licensing income as part of Warner Bros.' extensive library. Streaming platforms regularly feature The Shining, driving long-tail revenue and reinforcing its value as a piece of studio revenue optimization. This makes the film a prime example of how strong cinematography and production design can sustain shareholder value even in the absence of flashy CGI expenses. Warner Bros. Has further capitalized on the property with related works such as Dr. Sleep, 2019, expanding the film's franchise profitability forecast and reinforcing its brand recognition. Merchandising has also played a role in the film's revenue diversification. The iconic imagery from the carpet pattern to Jack Nicholson's face pressed through the splintered door has appeared on posters, clothing, collectibles and even home decor. These merchandising tie-ins generate additional ancillary revenue streams, proving that strong visual storytelling can create marketable symbols that endure for decades. Financial analysts often compare The Shining's monetization strategy to larger franchises such as Star Wars or Jurassic Park, where visual effects drive merchandise and licensing. While Kubrick's film did not have action figures or toy tie-ins, its cinematic artistry produced equally recognizable visuals that translated into profitable cultural symbols. From an investor insights perspective, this demonstrates that cumulative earnings are not solely dependent on CGI-heavy storytelling but can also result from bold cinematography and production design choices. The long-term profitability analysis of The Shining reveals that Kubrick's investment in cinematic excellence and practical visual effects produced enduring returns. Its place in film schools, streaming services and collector markets ensures ongoing content monetization. The combination of production cost efficiency in some areas, minimal reliance on expensive post-production CGI, with overages in others, extended filming schedules, created a unique financial modeling case, an initially modest success that evolved into a powerhouse of franchise profitability. From a shareholder value perspective, Warner Bros. Has maximized the film's financial potential by maintaining its cultural relevance through reissues and modern marketing campaigns. Special edition Blu-rays, theatrical anniversary screenings and digital remasters all contribute to a strong revenue pipeline. Furthermore, the enduring legacy of The Shining enhances the equity valuation of Warner Bros.' library, solidifying its reputation as a studio capable of producing blockbuster visuals and profitable long-term assets. Ultimately, The Shining demonstrates how cinematography and visual effects, even when minimal by contemporary blockbuster standards, can represent a high-value investment. Kubrick's perfectionism may have raised operating costs, but the resulting film has achieved unparalleled cumulative earnings and franchise revenue potential. Through smart monetization strategies, Warner Bros. Turned a challenging production into a cornerstone of horror cinema that continues to generate projected return on investment more than 40 years after its release. Part 6, Merchandise and Fan Engagement. Section A, Movie CO. There is something hypnotic about seeing Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance's face through a splintered door, or Shelley Duvall as Wendy Torrance clutching the hallway rails moments from The Shining, 1980, that fans want to own, wear, display and recreate. From early poster art to modern limited edition drops, The Shining, 1980, has become a cornerstone of official merchandise and fan engagement, turning cinematic fear into collectible desire. One high-profile collectible is the Stanley Kubrick's The Shining 2-volume compendium by Tascan, featuring Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance, Shelley Duvall as Wendy Torrance, Danny Lloyd as Danny Torrance, Scatman Crothers as Dick Halloran and the rest of the cast in hundreds of production photographs, concept art and crew interviews. This definite edition is listed at around US $125 for the modern retail version, and its special edition predecessor, limited to about 1,000 copies, had much higher ask prices, making it a fan favorite among franchise collectibles. Collectors also chase physical props. A stunt foam axe used on set by Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance is offered by Paul Fraser Collectibles, authenticated, displayed in a glass case, with the history of its usage in filming the door-breaking scene. That prop is not just memorabilia, it is also a symbol of merchandise hype. The aura of that moment, Jack Nicholson's "Here's Johnny" stick, fuels exclusive drops and display cases, appealing to fans who want tangible connections to the film's most unforgettable scenes. Poster art remains one of the strongest merchandise types for The Shining, 1980. Original vintage posters featuring Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance and Shelley Duvall as Wendy Torrance, often designed with the stark imagery of shadowed hallways or the carpet pattern, are sought after in collector communities. New prints and deluxe art replicas are released by galleries and specialty stores, often timed with anniversaries or reissues, generating viral trends and exclusive drops among collectors. Apparel and themed items also contribute significantly to fan engagement. T-shirts, hoodies and accessories referencing Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance or Danny Lloyd as Danny Torrance's tricycle, or Shelley Duvall as Wendy Torrance's night dress, appear in collections by merch specialty stores like Merc Hoyd, Cult of Cult, Zavvi and others. These themed apparel items are often limited edition or exclusive lines, sparking community-driven campaigns through social media, cosplay groups and HorrorCon fan art challenges. The Stanley Kubrick store offers official merchandise, including socks, exclusive designs and limited edition collectibles tied to The Shining, 1980. For instance, exclusive designs of Overlook Hotel imagery or quotes from Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance are featured, reinforcing the film's visual motifs in everyday items. These small but official merchandising pieces help maintain legitimacy and control over franchise collectibles. Another merchandise type that is appreciated among fans is special edition home media packaging. The limited edition Steelbook 4K Blu-ray of The Shining, 1980, featuring Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance on the cover and enhanced artwork, was released with premium features and often appreciation among collectors who care about physical product quality. These drops often come with bonus materials or artwork, making the purchase feel more exclusive and collectible. Fan art and community participation play a pivotal role in maintaining merchandise hype. A new generation, discovering The Shining, 1980, on streaming catalogs or Pix lists, often participates in Instagram challenges, recreating scenes like Danny Lloyd as Danny Torrance riding his tricycle, or the Grady twins in the hallway. Fan-made apparel, home decor, or art prints sometimes preface or accompany official drops, enhancing demand and visibility. Limited edition reproductions of the Overlook carpet pattern, used in home decor items, mimic visual elements seen behind Wendy Torrance, Shelley Duvall, in hallway shots, further linking merchandise to cinematic aesthetics. In summary, The Shining, 1980's merchandise universe: official merchandise, collectibles, apparel, exclusive drops, props and special editions is deeply entwined with its fan engagement. By centering iconic moments of Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance, Shelley Duvall as Wendy Torrance, Danny Lloyd as Danny Torrance, Scatman Crothers as Dick Halloran, the visual motifs and exclusivity drive community-driven campaigns, themed apparel, cosplay, social media buzz and limited edition releases. This sustained merchandise hype confirms the film's pop culture impact and franchise collectible status long after its 1980 debut. Merchandising revenue tied to The Shining, 1980, has grown into a steady contributor to cumulative revenue and franchise monetization, particularly when key character images are involved. Using images of Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance, Shelley Duvall as Wendy Torrance, Danny Lloyd as Danny Torrance and Scatman Crothers as Dick Halloran increases licensing rights value, because those are the most recognizable actors and characters in the film. Licensing income from poster prints, props, costumes, art books and limited edition drops adds meaningful profits, especially when overhead is low and perceived value is high. For example, the Taskin box set Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, where Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance, Shelley Duvall as Wendy Torrance, Danny Lloyd as Danny Torrance and Scatman Crothers as Dick Halloran are prominently featured, costs US $125 for the standard edition. Earlier, limited collector editions, about 1,000 units, were valued much higher per copy. That difference in pricing demonstrates how limited edition releases elevate The Shining, 1980's merchandise lifecycle profitability. Another major licensed item that drives income is the prop stunt acts used by Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance in filming the Overlook Hotel door smashing scene. That item, now displayed in a glass case with authentication, carries high collector interest and a premium price, both from provenance and iconic status. The earlier sale of an original wooden axe prop reportedly garnered over £172,000, roughly US $211,000, in 2019. Such merchandising revenue from rare items boosts The Shining, 1980's brand expansion and shareholder value. Operating profit from apparel and accessory lines is more modest individually but accumulates significantly with strong margins. T-shirts featuring Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance, stickers and enamel pins referencing Danny Lloyd as Danny Torrance, or nightgown motifs of Shelley Duvall as Wendy Torrance, when produced in limited prints, have low production cost but are sold at premium to horror collectors. Small batch runs reduce inventory risk. Licensing income for designs is often split with rights holders, but profit margins per item remain healthy. Digital campaign revenue and licensing rights are other financial streams. When special edition steelbook versions of The Shining, 1980, are released, featuring imagery of Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance and Shelley Duvall as Wendy Torrance on cover art, these generate spikes in sales and visibility. Pre-orders, exclusive retailer promotions and collector demand make such editions strong contributors to projected income in modern release cycles. For example, the recent limited edition Steelbook 4K Blu-ray listed for about US $29.65 demonstrates that value for physical media remains among collectors. License income from posters and art prints is less risky and contributes to cumulative earnings. Galleries and online shops selling framed poster art of Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance, the Overlook carpet motif, or Room 237 imagery profit from recurring demand. Even unreleased or rare poster designs, vintage prints, often sell at high markups. Operating costs for these are limited to printing, licensing, framing and shipping. High CPM revenue per sale helps boost profit margins. Merchandising revenue also benefits from promotional tie-ins. When the Taskin book set or Steelbook release is announced, corresponding limited merchandise drops often occur, art print bundles, postcards, which amplify brand expansion and marketing return on investment. These synergies increase the total revenue beyond what each product would make individually, enhancing profit projections for The Shining, 1980. From an investor perspective, the licensing rights tied to iconic character imagery Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance, Shelley Duvall as Wendy Torrance, Danny Lloyd as Danny Torrance, Scatman Crothers as Dick Halloran represent high-value assets. The projected income from collectibles, limited edition items, apparel, special edition media and art books, combined with low overhead for small batch or digital items, contributes to a strong cumulative earnings profile. Although The Shining, 1980, may not generate mass merchandising income like fantasy or superhero franchises, its brand expansion and franchise merchandising potential are considerable, and the long-term profit margins and shareholder value are bolstered by continued demand, scarcity and the film's enduring cultural power. When The Shining, 1980, premiered, it did not just enter theaters, it entered the bloodstream of pop culture. Directed by Stanley Kubrick and starring Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance, Shelley Duvall as Wendy Torrance, Danny Lloyd as Danny Torrance and Scatman Crothers as Dick Halloran, the film was originally met with mixed reviews, yet over time it became one of the most analyzed and reinterpreted horror films in cinematic discussions. Today, the fan culture surrounding the movie thrives on its viral scenes, internet trends and audience participation that shows no sign of slowing down. Fan culture around The Shining, 1980, centers heavily on its iconic moments. The most famous is Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance breaking through the bathroom door with an axe and yelling "Here's Johnny!" A line improvised by Nicholson that became one of the most quoted and parodied viral scenes in film history. Audience reactions to this moment still circulate as memes and viral clips across social media platforms, and influencer reactions often highlight this as a defining pop culture influence. Another fan-driven content trend is the mysterious appearance of the ghostly twins in the hallway, remembered through memes, influencer recreations and even Halloween costumes, underscoring the cultural impact of Kubrick's imagery. Community engagement around the film has also grown because of theories. The so-called Room 237 phenomenon created a wave of cinematic discussions and fan-driven content. Some claimed the film was about Native American genocide, others saw it as commentary on the Holocaust, while a notable viral theory suggested Stanley Kubrick staged the Apollo 11 moon landing and left clues in Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance's dialogue and Danny Lloyd as Danny Torrance's Apollo sweater. These fan theories, whether credible or not, demonstrate the depth of fandom activity and audience participation. The internet age only amplified this, as fan culture found a home on forums, video essays and influencer reactions dissecting every frame. In terms of pop culture influence, The Shining, 1980, is consistently compared to competitor films like Psycho, 1960, and Alien, 1979. Where Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, 1960, shocked audiences with psychological horror and Ridley Scott's Alien, 1979, introduced outer space terror, Kubrick's masterpiece combined art film aesthetics with horror conventions, leaving a lasting cultural impact that continues to inspire viral clips and internet trends. Unlike its competitors, The Shining, 1980, also became a meme factory decades later, demonstrating franchise relevance far beyond its original release. Streaming engagement in recent years has allowed new generations to encounter the movie. Though streaming platforms did not exist in 1980, later digital distribution on platforms like HBO Max, Netflix and Prime Video gave the film renewed life. Reviews and audience reactions surged online whenever the film reappeared in streaming libraries, showing how digital platforms facilitate community engagement. Influencers often film live reactions to the "Here's Johnny" sequence or the blood-filled elevator scene, generating viral content that keeps the cultural impact fresh. Memes are central to the ongoing pop culture influence. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy has been retyped, re-edited and turned into viral content countless times, showcasing fan-driven content and internet trends. TikTok influencers reenacted Shelley Duvall as Wendy Torrance screaming while holding a knife, while Twitter users circulate clips of Danny Lloyd as Danny Torrance riding his tricycle down the Overlook hotel halls, often set to trending audio. This level of fandom activity demonstrates not just nostalgia, but active audience participation and community-driven engagement. The fan culture has also crossed into physical spaces. The Timberline Lodge in Oregon, which provided exterior shots of the Overlook Hotel, attracts fans as a tourist destination. Community engagement extends into fan conventions and Halloween events, where influencers and enthusiasts recreate iconic moments from the film. This type of audience participation highlights the lasting cultural impact, proving that the film is more than just a horror movie, it is a cultural artifact. By comparison, Psycho, 1960, had its shower scene go viral long before the internet, through word of mouth and academic study, while Alien, 1979, had the chest-burster scene fuel cinematic discussions for decades. Yet The Shining, 1980, adapted most seamlessly into the age of memes. Internet trends and influencer reactions, proving that its viral scenes and cultural influence keep it constantly relevant. Fan-driven content ensures that each year, the film reappears as a trending topic, whether during Halloween marathons or in community engagement spaces online. In sum, the pop culture influence of The Shining, 1980, demonstrates how fandom activity, audience participation and internet trends create a feedback loop of community engagement. Through memes, reviews, viral clips and influencer reactions, the film sustains an unparalleled cultural impact, ensuring franchise relevance and reminding the world of the power of fan culture in shaping cinematic discussions. When The Shining, 1980, was released, it immediately took a place among the genre benchmarks of horror and psychological cinema. Directed by Stanley Kubrick and starring Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance, Shelley Duvall as Wendy Torrance, Danny Lloyd as Danny Torrance and Scatman Crothers as Dick Halloran, the film merged elements of dystopian thrillers, survival films and psychological nightmares into a single unforgettable experience. While it was unique in its execution, critics and fans alike could not resist drawing comparisons to similar hits that had defined the horror and thriller genre in earlier decades. Among the most prominent comparisons were Psycho, 1960, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, and Don't Look Now, 1973, directed by Nicholas Roeg. The narrative structure of The Shining, 1980, with its slow burn tension and claustrophobic setting inside the Overlook Hotel, recalls the tightly wound storytelling of Psycho, 1960. In Hitchcock's masterpiece, Anthony Perkins as Norman Bates unravels in a similarly isolated environment, with madness emerging through shocking plot twists. Just as Nicholson as Jack Torrance delivers one of cinema's most terrifying portraits of psychological collapse, Perkins' Norman Bates embodies the same theme of fractured identity, each performance redefining audience expectations of survival films rooted in mental disintegration rather than external monsters. By contrast, Don't Look Now, 1973, starring Donald Sutherland as John Baxter and Julie Christie as Laura Baxter, resonates with The Shining, 1980, through its use of psychic visions and supernatural dread. Danny Lloyd as Danny Torrance, with his gift of The Shining, mirrors the psychic sensitivity in Roeg's haunting story of grief and fate. Both Kubrick and Roeg used visual storytelling, extended tracking shots, symbolic colors and unsettling juxtapositions to blur the lines between reality and nightmare. These comparable cinematic experiences illustrate how directors in the 1960s and 1970s advanced the grammar of horror, setting the stage for Kubrick's achievement in 1980. Where Hitchcock used stark black and white imagery in Psycho, 1960, to build suspense, Kubrick employed Steadicam tracking shots and bold, symmetrical hotel hallways to immerse viewers in dread. Where Roeg fragmented time and played with prophetic visions in Don't Look Now, 1973, Kubrick inserted Danny's psychic flashes and the infamous elevator of blood to root terror in both supernatural and psychological landscapes. These director-style comparisons place Kubrick in dialogue with Hitchcock and Roeg, uniting them as innovators of cinematic dread. The performances also demand comparison. Shelley Duvall as Wendy Torrance embodies fragility and resilience in the face of terror, echoing Janet Leigh as Marion Crane in Psycho, 1960, who carried Hitchcock's film through its shocking first act. Similarly, Danny Lloyd's vulnerable but gifted Danny Torrance parallels the psychic childlike innocence that audiences read into Don't Look Now, 1973's imagery, a child's vision defining the boundaries of fear. Just as Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie grounded their film in parental grief, the Torrance family's collapse in Kubrick's film makes The Shining, 1980, not just a ghost story, but a family tragedy. What truly cements The Shining, 1980, as a franchise-level movie and audience favorite is how it transcended horror to influence wider cinematic trends. Psycho, 1960, redefined horror in its time, setting the standard for slasher and psychological narratives. Don't Look Now, 1973, elevated supernatural suspense into Arthur's territory, showing that horror could be a critical darling. The Shining, 1980, fused these traditions into a story that is both a survival film and a dystopian thriller, where the antagonist is both a haunted hotel and the human mind unraveling under isolation. Even decades later, The Shining, 1980, remains a fan-favorite movie in streaming libraries and home media. Its iconic moments, Jack Nicholson's "Here's Johnny" and the chilling twins in the hallway, circulate as viral clips, memes and cultural references, much like Norman Bates' shower scene in Psycho, 1960, or the red-coated child in Don't Look Now, 1973. Together, these films represent genre benchmarks, each a pillar in the architecture of horror. From a financial perspective, comparing The Shining, 1980, to earlier films like Psycho, 1960, and Don't Look Now, 1973, provides a valuable study in comparative revenue, return on investment benchmarks and franchise profitability. The Shining, 1980, had a production budget of approximately $19 million, an unusually high figure for a horror film at that time. In contrast, Psycho, 1960, was produced on a shoestring budget of about $800,000, making it a classic example of extreme return on investment benchmarks. The efficiency of Hitchcock's budget turned Psycho, 1960, into a massive success, with comparative revenue that set the standard for psychological thrillers as commercially viable. Don't Look Now, 1973, with a modest budget, achieved profitability largely through international distribution and long-term licensing revenue, establishing it as a respected critical darling with financial staying power. In Kubrick's case, operating expenses were much higher, largely due to extended shooting schedules and the construction of enormous overlook hotel sets at Elstree Studios. This initially created financial risk for Warner Brothers, especially since box office returns for The Shining, 1980, around $46,800,000 worldwide were solid but not groundbreaking compared to blockbusters of the same period. However, the long-term monetization strategy ensured that The Shining, 1980, would outperform its initial reception. Home video licensing efficiency, digital monetization through VHS, DVD and Blu-ray and later television syndication generated steady income. When compared to Hitchcock's Psycho, 1960, The Shining, 1980, demonstrates a different path toward financial success. Hitchcock's film achieved immediate high profit margins with minimal investment, while Kubrick's film became profitable through decades of cumulative revenue. Similarly, Don't Look Now, 1973, had lower production cost analysis but sustained profitability through niche audiences, film festival screenings and specialty home releases. These financial comparisons highlight how different monetization strategies can still achieve strong shareholder value. Marketing return on investment also reflects unique approaches. Warner Brothers promoted The Shining, 1980, with memorable trailers, including the viral elevator blood sequence, which became a lasting advertising asset. This kind of promotional revenue synergy mirrors Hitchcock's innovative marketing campaign for Psycho, 1960, where audiences were barred from entering the theater late to maintain suspense. Rogue's Don't Look Now, 1973, relied less on spectacle and more on critical acclaim to generate international sales. In each case, advertising revenue efficiency was adapted to the director's style and audience expectations. From an investor projections perspective, The Shining, 1980's higher budget meant slower initial returns compared to Psycho, 1960. Yet its cultural impact fueled franchise profitability through decades of monetization. The release of Dr. Sleep, 2019, expanded the franchise and reactivated licensing streams for Kubrick's original film, creating a revenue diversification effect. Meanwhile, Psycho, 1960, spawned sequels, a remake and even a television spin-off, Bates Motel, multiplying its franchise return on investment. Don't Look Now, 1973, while less commercially extended, remains valuable through catalog licensing, keeping its profit margins steady across decades. For Warner Brothers, the key value of The Shining, 1980, lies in long-term shareholder value. While not the top-grossing film of its era, its steady income from multiple media channels demonstrates how a film with strong cultural presence can sustain investor relevance for generations. Each new distribution cycle, whether DVD box sets, Blu-ray anniversary editions, or digital re-releases, translates into new high-value CPM streams. When The Shining, 1980, first entered theaters, its journey to cinematic recognition was unusual but persistent. Directed by Stanley Kubrick and starring Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance, Shelley Duvall as Wendy Torrance, Danny Lloyd as Danny Torrance and Scatman Crothers as Dick Halloran, the film did not immediately sweep major awards or enjoy huge festival screenings. Critics' reviews were mixed. The Shining, 1980, earned nominations at the very first Golden Raspberry Awards in 1981 for Worst Director, Stanley Kubrick, and Worst Actress, Shelley Duvall, though the nomination for Worst Actress was later rescinded in 2022 due to backlash over Kubrick's treatment of Duvall on set. Critics praised The Shining, 1980, for its performances, visuals and storytelling in certain quarters, even while others found fault with pacing and emotional distance. Janet Maslin of the New York Times lauded Nicholson's performance as Jack Torrance and praised the Overlook Hotel setting as effective, even while criticizing what she saw as underexplained supernatural elements. Variety criticized it for failing to deliver the terror expected from Stephen King's novel despite its spectacular visuals. Initial audience reactions, such as those polled by CinemaScore, gave The Shining, 1980, an average grade of C+ on an A and to F scale, showing that early audience reactions were divided. Over time, though, The Shining, 1980's reputation increased. Critics' reviews retrospectively recognize it as one of the best horror films ever made. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds about 84% positive reviews, with an average rating around 8.6 out of 10. Metacritic shows a weighted average score of 68 out of 100, indicating generally favorable reviews. The Shining, 1980, is often called a must-watch film in horror retrospectives. Its fan-favorite scenes, Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance breaking through a door with an axe and shouting "Here's Johnny," the appearance of the twin Grady girls in the hallway are frequently cited in top movie moments lists. Compared to Psycho, 1960, and Alien, 1979, The Shining, 1980, received fewer initial honors. Psycho, 1960, had multiple Academy Award nominations, Best Director, Best Supporting Actress, etc., and Alien, 1979, won an Academy Award for Best Visual Effects and nominations in several categories. The Shining, 1980, in contrast, did not receive any nominations from the Oscars or Golden Globes, nor from the BAFTAs, at the time of release. However, over the decades, The Shining, 1980, garnered critical acclaim and gained recognition such as selection for preservation in the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress in 2018 for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. Festival screenings per SE are not prominently documented for The Shining, 1980. Its prestige has risen mainly through industry honors, critical reappraisal and audience scores over time. In AFI's lists, for example, The Shining, 1980, was placed among AFI's 100 Years, 100 Thrills, 29th place, and Jack Torrance was named among AFI's 100 Years, 100 Heroes and Villains for his villainous turn. Fun trivia: The Shining, 1980, was nominated for a Razzie in its first year ever of that award. Later, the Worst Actress nomination for Shelley Duvall as Wendy Torrance was rescinded decades later because of controversies over working conditions. Also, the quote "Here's Johnny" was ranked by AFI among 100 Years, 100 movie quotes, and some individual scenes from The Shining, 1980, appear in lists of the scariest movie moments by critics and fan polls. The long view matters. The Shining, 1980, evolved from mixed initial critical reception into a standard of what awards, nominations and critical acclaim fans expect of high-quality horror filmmaking. Its recognition has grown dramatically, and today many call it among the top-rated movies in horror genre benchmarks. Recognition and critical acclaim often act as catalysts for financial uplift. For The Shining, 1980, its awards and nominations, or the lack thereof, at first shaped early revenue trajectories, but over time its post-award revenue boost, licensing income and projected earnings derived more from its growing reputation than from formal honors. At release, The Shining, 1980, did not receive nominations from the Oscars, Golden Globes, or BAFTAs. That absence meant early investor expectations were tempered. However, it did receive 2 nominations at the Golden Raspberry Awards: Worst Director and Worst Actress, Shelley Duvall. Although Razzies are negative awards, the nomination itself contributed to the film's notoriety, which later helped in audience curiosity and sales through home video. After years of re-evaluation and growing critical acclaim, The Shining, 1980's licensing income and content monetization increased. Positive critics' reviews, inclusion in top movie lists, and industry honors like the National Film Registry selection served as validation, which in turn enhanced its merchandise tie-ins and collector's edition sales. These are part of a monetization strategy based on cumulative revenue and reputation rather than immediate award success. Compared with Psycho, 1960, or Alien, 1979, The Shining, 1980's financial impact from awards recognition developed more slowly. Alien, 1979, had early awards, Best Visual Effects Oscar, and Psycho, 1960, received multiple Academy Award nominations, which traditionally boost box office and studio prestige immediately. The Shining, 1980, lacking those, did not benefit from direct post-award revenue from major ceremonies, but benefited over the long term as critical acclaim built up. Free publicity from critic reviews and retrospective festival screenings also contributed to marketing return on investment over decades. The Shining, 1980, has high CPM advertising streams each time a fan event, anniversary screening, or retrospective publishes newly restored footage or interviews. These cause spikes in sales of DVDs, Blu-ray and licensed merchandise. Profit forecasts for such reissues often include premium pricing for special packaging and extras, matching what competitor franchises have done. Licensing profitability for The Shining, 1980, is enhanced by its recognition. For example, the National Film Registry honor, along with critical acclaim in lists like AFI's, elevates its status among collectors and licensors, allowing higher licensing fees for television, anthology horror compilations and streaming platforms. In later decades, than a film lacking such honors might command. Franchise valuation also benefits. The Shining, 1980, eventually led to the film Dr. Sleep, 2019, which brought renewed attention and monetization to the original. Merchandise tie-ins, collector's editions and licensing deals all see revenue diversification due to the original film's recognition and critical acclaim. Investor return on investment projections for The Shining, 1980, today rely heavily on its catalog value, home video and later digital editions, licensing revenue, merchandising tied to its iconic scenes, Here's Johnny, Twins, Overlook Hotel imagery, and cumulative revenue across decades, all boosted by its critical reputation. In essence, while early awards and nominations were sparse and somewhat negative, The Shining, 1980's long-term financial strength owes much to its growing recognition and critic reviews. That recognition underpins profit margins, licensing efficiency and shareholder value in ways that few horror films initially deprived of major awards managed to achieve. High in the remote mountains of Colorado, the Overlook Hotel stands as a monument to isolation, grandeur and secrets. Snow surrounds it, cutting it off from the world, and within its walls, the line between reality and nightmare blurs. This is where the story of the Torrance family unfolds, a story told in two distinct ways, through Stephen King's 1977 novel The Shining and Stanley Kubrick's 1980 cinematic adaptation. Though both share the same core premise, a family trapped in a haunted hotel during a harsh winter, the experience of horror, character depth and emotional resonance differ profoundly between the two. In King's novel, Jack Torrance is introduced not just as a man seeking work, but as a deeply human character carrying the weight of past failures and personal demons. He is an ex-alcoholic and a writer struggling with his temper, haunted by regrets and a desperate need to prove himself. The novel takes time to explore his inner turmoil, making his eventual descent into madness both terrifying and tragically understandable. Jack is not a one-dimensional villain, he is a man whose vulnerabilities are preyed upon by the sinister force residing in the Overlook. Readers see his thought processes, his attempts to resist the hotel's influence, and ultimately, his slow surrender to the darkness that lurks both within the building and within himself. Wendy, Jack's wife, in the book, is no passive observer. She is courageous, intuitive and fiercely protective of her young son, Danny. King allows readers to see her thought patterns, her fears and her strategies to shield her family from the mounting horrors around them. She observes the subtle changes in Jack, the hotel's growing influence, and Danny's psychic visions, acting as both protector and anchor in the storm of supernatural chaos. Danny himself is more than just a child with a shining, he is the emotional and psychic heart of the story. King dives into his perspective, portraying his precocious awareness of danger, his psychic communication with the hotel's malevolent forces, and his attempts to understand the terrifying visions that appear before him. The novel spends significant time unraveling Danny's inner world, which heightens the sense of dread and empathy for his plight. Kubrick's film, by contrast, approaches the story with a different kind of intensity. Jack Nicholson's Jack Torrance is immediately unpredictable and volatile, a presence that exudes menace from the start. While the movie provides glimpses of his vulnerabilities, his descent into madness feels more sudden and externalized, driven by Nicholson's intense performance and Kubrick's direction. The psychological tension is still present, but it is communicated through visual cues, dialogue and haunting imagery rather than extended inner monologues. Wendy, played by Shelley Duvall, is more fragile in the film, often shown in panic or hysteria, which heightens the audience's fear but reduces the character's agency compared to the novel. Danny's abilities, while central, are conveyed visually rather than internally. The use of props like Redrum and his interactions with the ghostly twin girls communicate his visions effectively on screen, but much of the nuance of his thoughts and emotional depth is lost in translation. The tone of the book and movie also diverge in significant ways. King's novel is a slow burn, weaving psychological and supernatural horror together with themes of family, addiction and the consequences of personal flaws. The terror comes not only from ghosts and visions but from the very human drama of a family's breakdown, and the narrative allows the reader to linger in that tension, to understand the why behind the horror. The Overlook is malevolent, yes, but its power is intertwined with Jack's vulnerabilities, making the story a meditation on human weakness as much as supernatural evil. Kubrick's film, however, is colder, more surreal and visually unnerving. The horror is often conveyed through imagery, camera movement and sound rather than detailed psychological insight. The hotel itself becomes a living entity, a character whose presence is felt in every shot, from the endless corridors to the eerie twins in the hallway. The story leaves viewers in a state of ambiguity. Is Jack driven mad by the hotel, or is his madness inevitable due to his own flaws? The supernatural elements are present but more enigmatic. The film is less about explaining the evil and more about creating a lingering unease, a feeling that something is profoundly wrong even if it cannot be fully articulated. Certain events and details illustrate the contrasts between the two mediums. In the novel, the hedge animals that come alive represent one of the hotel's most surreal manifestations of evil, and Jack's backstory and personal struggles are given considerable attention. In Kubrick's film, these elements are removed or downplayed, replaced with imagery designed for immediate visual impact and psychological discomfort. Similarly, the book elaborates on the hotel's history, including past caretakers and murders, giving a broader context for its malevolent presence. The movie condenses these elements, instead using visual motifs and dialogue to hint at the hotel's dark past, enhancing the mystery and tension rather than providing exhaustive explanation. Despite these differences, both the book and movie excel in their own ways. King's novel delivers an immersive experience, where horror grows from character depth, the psychic presence of Danny and the insidious influence of the Overlook. It allows readers to engage with the story intellectually and emotionally, understanding the characters' motivations and fears. Kubrick's adaptation transforms the narrative into a cinematic experience, relying on atmosphere, visual storytelling and auditory cues to evoke fear. The film's lingering shots, unsettling score and Nicholson's intense performance create a tension that is immediate and visceral, making the hotel itself feel like a character that dominates the screen. The endings also highlight the contrast. In the novel, Jack's arc retains a sense of tragic redemption, his actions are intertwined with his human flaws and the hotel's supernatural power. In the movie, the ending is more ambiguous, emphasizing isolation and inevitability. The fiery conclusion and the famous photograph leave audiences with lingering questions rather than resolution, enhancing the film's surreal and haunting quality. Ultimately, comparing Stephen King's The Shining to Kubrick's adaptation is a study in the different ways horror can be expressed. The novel emphasizes psychological complexity, character development and the intertwining of human weakness with supernatural evil. The film emphasizes visual and auditory storytelling, atmosphere and ambiguity, creating a sense of unease that is more immediate and haunting in a sensory way. Both versions have earned their place in horror history, each powerful in its own right, the book as a deeply human and supernatural journey, the movie as a masterpiece of cinematic tension and terror. In the end, the story of the Torrances and the Overlook Hotel transcends medium. Whether experienced through King's meticulous prose or Kubrick's haunting imagery, The Shining forces audiences to confront isolation, madness and the darkness that can dwell within both haunted places and human minds. Each version offers a unique lens on horror, one through empathy and psychological insight, the other through atmosphere and cinematic craft. Together, they form a dual legacy, demonstrating the richness and versatility of storytelling and why The Shining remains a cornerstone of horror in both literature and film. Decades after its release, The Shining, 1980, has grown far beyond a single film into a film legacy with deep cultural relevance. Directed by Stanley Kubrick, starring Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance, Shelley Duvall as Wendy Torrance, Danny Lloyd as Danny Torrance and Scatman Crothers as Dick Halloran, The Shining, 1980, is frequently cited among top thrillers and must-watch films for both genre fans and film scholars. The film legacy includes not only its original terror and psychological weight but also its pop culture footprint, viral fan theories, enduring memes and continuous audience engagement across home media and streaming popularity. Fan anticipation for spin-offs or sequel potential has risen, especially after the release of Dr. Sleep, 2019, which is a literary sequel and cinematic adaptation that revisits the Overlook Hotel and Danny Torrance as an adult. While Dr. Sleep, 2019, is based on Stephen King's novel, many fans speculate about further franchise expansion spin-offs focusing on Dick Halloran's background or other characters persecuted by the Overlook's supernatural influence. Such franchise potential echoes what Psycho, 1960, spawned, multiple sequels, a TV series and remakes, and what Alien, 1979, evolved into, sequel films, merchandise, cross-media presence. In comparison, The Shining, 1980, stands as a benchmark among similar hits for how its universe can meaningfully expand. Director Stanley Kubrick did not direct any further Shining spin-off himself and no current public director projects exist officially linking him to new entries. He died in 1999. But cast members' legacy roles continue to be celebrated. Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance remains one of Nicholson's most iconic turns. Shelley Duvall's portrayal of Wendy Torrance is often listed in retrospectives of women in horror, Danny Lloyd's performance remains central when discussing child actors in horror. Those cast performance highlights feed ongoing fan anticipation and keep The Shining, 1980, relevant when new audiences seek top-rated releases or genre influence in streaming catalogs. Streaming platform hits in recent years have boosted The Shining, 1980's cultural relevance. Though no streaming existed in 1980, decades later digital editions, Blu-ray reissues and inclusion in streaming service libraries, for example, horror curations, have sustained audience engagement. Viewing numbers and popularity in curated horror collections often place The Shining, 1980, alongside Psycho, 1960, and Alien, 1979, as genre influence markers. Fans share viral fan theories concerning hidden meanings in Overlook's layout, symbolism in color palette, or Shelley Duvall's bat scene, enhancing the film's cinematic impact and reinforcing its franchise potential. Another fun fact, The Shining, 1980, was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry in 2018 for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. That formal recognition contributes to its cinematic milestones. Also, The Shining, 1980's quote "Here's Johnny" was ranked among the American Film Institute's top 100 movie quotes. Such industry honors and festival highlights may have been fewer at release compared to Alien, 1979, which won an Academy Award for Best Visual Effects, or Psycho, 1960, which had Academy nominations, but over time The Shining, 1980's legacy has grown strongly. Franchise potential remains alive in fan speculation. Could there be spin-offs centered on Hedge Maze events, or psychological prequels about past caretakers of the Overlook Hotel? Fan favorite scenes: Jack Torrance's breakdown, Wendy Torrance's desperation, Danny Torrance's visions are often cited as seedbeds for expanded storytelling. These ideas contribute to The Shining, 1980's film legacy and shape its future entry points into pop culture, influencing upcoming cast roles in derivative works or inspirations in modern horror films. Through cinematic impact, audience engagement, top thrillers lists and streaming popularity of restored versions, The Shining, 1980, cements itself not only as a critical darling but as a cornerstone for franchise expansions and cultural relevance, even as Psycho, 1960, and Alien, 1979, remain benchmarks. The Shining, 1980, distinguishes itself by the richness of its mythology, the durability of its legacy and the strong fan base anticipation for what might yet come. Looking at The Shining, 1980, from the perspective of long-term financial value, its film legacy and spin-off speculation translate into potential franchise return on investment and projected earnings for stakeholders. While the original investment, production budget and theatrical revenue, happened decades ago, the cumulative revenue and licensing income that followed have built a strong foundation for multi-channel revenue and investor return on investment. Given its status in film history, The Shining, 1980, has seen revenue diversification through formats such as
theatrical release, television broadcast rights, home media like VHS, Betamax, Laserdisc, DVD, Blu-ray, and later licensing to streaming services. Each format added incremental digital rights income and licensing income. The merchandising lifecycle around the franchise continues. For example, posters, memorabilia of Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance, and artifacts of the Overlook Hotel design. These items sustain profit margins over time. Projected investor returns depend on how future spin-offs or sequels might be financed. If a spin-off focusing on Dick Halloran or past Overlook caretakers is produced, multi-channel earnings could include theatrical box office, international streaming licensing, merchandising tie-ins, and collector's edition physical media. Based on comparisons with Psycho, 1960, which achieved high blockbuster continuity and produced sequels and remakes, and Alien, 1979, which likewise spawned merchandise, theme park presence, and sequels, The Shining, 1980, has similar franchise valuation potential, though less fully realized thus far. Streaming sustainability is a key part of the model. As The Shining, 1980, continues to appear in streaming catalogs and horror anthology collections, its licensing income from digital platforms remains a recurring revenue source. These high CPM monetization events occur especially when anniversary editions or remastered cuts are promoted, driving marketing ROI and increasing revenue diversification. Collector's editions with bonus content, making of documentaries, interviews, restored scenes, often command premium pricing from dedicated fans, boosting projected earnings. Profit forecasts for The Shining, 1980, as future spin-offs or expanded universe, while speculative, are promising. Given the fan anticipation and existing cultural relevance, investor expectations might price in strong returns from merchandising revenue and international licensing. These projected earnings hinge on careful budget allocation, cast involvement, and the ability to preserve the visual and narrative style that made The Shining, 1980, distinctive. Licensing income from legacy status, e.g. National Film Registry prestige, AFI quote recognitions, tends to allow higher fees. Streaming platforms and content licensors often pay more for recognized classics. If The Shining, 1980, spin-offs are developed, franchise ROI may be enhanced by leveraging that recognition. High-value CPM streams can come from trailers, retrospectives, special edition promotions, all feeding into cumulative revenue in ways that theatrical alone could not. From the shareholder value perspective, The Shining, 1980, represents a catalog asset with enduring value rather than a one-off box office success. Its operating profit in modern releases, home media, anniversary editions, is boosted by low incremental costs, no need for new set construction for reissues, relying on existing film negatives or masters. This means future licensing income and merchandising revenue yield higher margins. Given revenue diversification across physical media, licensing and merchandise, The Shining, 1980's franchise valuation remains high. When we compare The Shining as a Stephen King book with The Shining as a Stephen King movie, the numbers tell us an incredible story about how novels and films can function as two separate but deeply connected industries. Back in 1977, when Stephen King released The Shining book, it quickly cemented itself as a horror classic, climbing bestseller lists and proving the commercial power of Stephen King novels in the publishing world. Readers were obsessed, and the book launched King further into the spotlight as the author of scary stories, chilling thrillers, and dark psychological tales. Sales figures for the Stephen King book stacked up year after year, making it not just a hit in bookstores, but also a financial powerhouse for publishers. But then came Hollywood. Only 3 years later, Stanley Kubrick adapted The Shining based on the novel by Stephen King, and this is where the financial comparison gets fascinating. While the Stephen King book brought King money and an army of loyal readers, the Stephen King movie created an entirely new revenue stream: box office earnings, re-releases, VHS sales, DVD collector's editions, streaming rights, cable reruns, merchandise, Halloween movie marathons. The movie industry turned one scary story into a global financial success. Even if the original box office wasn't massive in 1980, the film's cult classic status has made The Shining one of the most profitable horror movies based on a book in Hollywood history. For movie fans, this adaptation became more than just another scary movie. It was a genre-defining moment. For book fans, it showed how the popularity of Stephen King novels translated into cinema. For Halloween movie marathons and horror movie lists, it instantly became a permanent fixture. And financially, the movie adaptation of the Stephen King book exploded in ways the publishing industry alone could never achieve. That's the real power of Stephen King. He conquers two industries at once. His books drive best-selling numbers in publishing, while his movies drive box office, pop culture fascination, and financial longevity. The Shining proves that when a story is based on a Stephen King novel, it doesn't just work as a book, and it doesn't just work as a movie. It thrives in both markets. The Stephen King book became a must-read. The Stephen King movie became a must-watch scary movie, one of the ultimate Halloween movies, and a cult classic still trending among film buffs and movie fans all over YouTube and streaming platforms. So, by comparing the financial success of The Shining the book and The Shining the movie, one truth stands clear. When a story is based on the novel by Stephen King, it is not just entertainment. It is a financial engine, a cultural landmark, and an SEO goldmine of keywords for scary movies, horror movies, cult classics, and Halloween traditions alike. And that's the incredible financial afterlife of The Shining. What started as a 1980 theatrical release based on the book by Stephen King has transformed into one of the most profitable and talked about scary movies in cinema history. Today, it isn't just a horror movie, it's a scary movie classic, a Halloween movie staple, a cult movie favorite, and a legendary piece of Hollywood box office lore. Every time people search for Stephen King movies or revisit lists of the best scary movies, horror movies, and Halloween movies, The Shining is always there, proving that a movie based on a novel by Stephen King has the power to stay trending for decades. This is why movie fans keep rewatching it, why scary movie marathons keep highlighting it, and why YouTube still buzzes with nostalgia whenever The Shining is mentioned. It's not just a Stephen King story. It's not just a Hollywood adaptation based on a book. It's a scary movie classic, a horror movie masterpiece, a Halloween tradition, and a cult classic film that movie fans, film buffs, and cinema lovers everywhere can't stop talking about. In the end, The Shining proves exactly why Stephen King and scary movies belong together, because when movies are this iconic, this nostalgic, and this financially resilient, they never fade from Hollywood history. So if you're a movie fan chasing scary movies, a cinephile analyzing cult classics, or just someone building a Halloween movie marathon, remember, The Shining is pure Stephen King cinema, a scary movie turned classic movie, a horror favorite turned cultural landmark, and one of the most important movies ever made about fear, storytelling, and the business of Hollywood.